High over the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul, on the 3rd of January 1944, the greatest fighter ace in the United States Marine Corps is fighting for his life and losing. His corsair has been hit, and it is burning, and there are enemy fighters all around him in a swirling, deadly brawl. He gets out, bails into the open sky over the ocean, wounded, and comes down in the water far behind enemy lines, alone with the battle roaring away above him, and then he is gone. When the fight is over and the planes fly home, he is simply not among them, and no one saw a parachute, and no one finds him, and the most famous marine pilot of the war has vanished into the Pacific without a trace. His country will spend the next 20 months believing he is dead. His country will be wrong. His name was Gregory Boyington, though everyone called him Pappy, because at 31 he was old enough to be the father of the young pilots he led, and he led one of the most famous units of the entire war, Marine Fighting Squadron 240, the Black Sheep Squadron, a band of replacement pilots and cast-offs he had welded into a legend. He was the top ace in the Marine Corps, a hard-drinking, rule-breaking, brilliant maverick, and on that January morning he was at the height of a fame that made his disappearance a national blow. The Marines had lost their best. In the days after, the searchers found nothing. No raft, no wreckage, no word. In a war where men vanished over the ocean all the time, the conclusion was grim and obvious, and it was reached. Pappy Boyington, ace of aces of the Marine Corps, was dead, killed in action over Rabaul. The squadron he had built mourned him, the country mourned him, and the machinery of a grateful nation began to do the thing it did for its fallen heroes. They were about to give him the highest honor America has, and every single person involved believed they were giving it to a dead man. He had already been recommended for the Medal of Honor, and now, with the Ace Award for Valor, was grant through to Gregory Boyington for his extraordinary record in the air, an honor of the kind so phantom, inatcon so often pinned in that war, to a folded flag and a grieving family. Everyone understood it as a tribute to a hero who had given his life. Everyone was certain he was gone, and all the while they honored his memory. Pappy Boyington was alive. Quick thing before we go on, if you're enjoying this, subscribing genuinely helps the channel keep telling these stories. Thank you. Now back to how this man became a legend in the first place. Boyington was never a model officer, and that was rather the point. He was talented and difficult, a gifted pilot with a taste for trouble, and by 1943 the Marines handed him a job that suited him perfectly. Take a collection of spare, unassigned and overlooked pilots in the South Pacific and make a fighting squadron out of them. He did, and he named them the Black Sheep, and he led them from the front in their big, powerful corsair fighters against the Japanese in the skies over the Solomons. Under him they became famous, and he became the deadliest marine flyer of the war, downing enemy planes at a pace that made headlines back home, an ace many times over, the swaggering, hard-living face of marine aviation. He flew hard and he lived hard, and he pushed everything to the edge, including himself, and by that January of 1944 he had climbed to the very top of the ace lists and the very top of the Marines' pride, which is exactly what made the mission over Rabaul, and the empty sky where his plane should have been, land like a hammer blow. The best they had was gone, or so it seemed. Because what had actually happened to Pappy Boyington after he hit the water was a story no one back home would learn for a very long time. That final morning fit the pattern of everything he was. Boyington flew toward Rabaul, the most heavily defended target in that corner of the Pacific, ringed by anti-aircraft guns and swarming with enemy fighters, the kind of place where the odds caught up with even the best. He was closing on the top of the ace lists, chasing the record, pushing as he always pushed, and he took the fight right into the enemy's front yard. It was exactly the sort of high-stakes gamble that had made him famous and made his squadron great, and this time the gamble came due. Somewhere in that swirling fight the enemy got him, and the ace who had beaten the odds so many times finally did not. Here is the truth the searchers missed. Boyington had gotten out of his burning corsair and come down in the fall and the water, floating alone far behind enemy lines, and then out of that same seas. And the Japanese submarine sea he was found, not by his own side but by the enemy. The Dead Ice submarine picked him up, and he was a prisoner of war, and he was about to disappear into a system that would keep his survival secret across the war. For the rest of the... What followed were 20 months of captivity, and they were brutal. That Boyington was held in Japanese prison camps, subjected to the hunger, the hard labor, and the harsh treatment that Allied prisoners in the Pacific endured, his fame useless to him, his name unknown to his captors as anyone special. Just another starving prisoner trying to survive from one day to the next, and crucially, word of him never got out. His name did not appear on the prisoner lists that reached home. As far as the United States knew, he was still dead, a hero in his grave, his Medal of Honor a memorial. He spent nearly 2 years as a living ghost, mourned by a country that had no idea he was still fighting to stay alive. And then the war ended, and the truth came out of the camps. The silence was the cruelest part, for everyone. For his family and his squadron and his country, the silence meant he was dead, and they grieved and moved on. For Boyington himself, the silence was a different kind of torment. He was alive, but no one who could help him knew it, and there was no way to send word home that he had survived. He simply had to endure day after day, month after month, holding on through the hunger and the beatings and the sickness of camp life, with no idea whether he would ever be found, whether anyone was even looking, whether the war would end before he did. Survival in that situation was not a single dramatic act. It was the grinding refusal to give up, repeated across nearly 2 years, by a man the world had already buried. When Japan surrendered in August 1945 and the prison camps were opened, the Allies began the staggering work of recovering their prisoners, and among the gaunt, half-starved men who came out of Japanese captivity was one whose name stopped people cold, Gregory Boyington, Pappy. The ace who had been dead for 20 months was standing there alive, thin and worn but unmistakably himself, walking out of a Paulu camp and back into a world that had long since buried him. It is hard to imagine the shock of it, the telegrams, the disbelief, a man returning from the dead, not as a story, but as a fact. And so Pappy Boyington came home to a thing almost no one ever gets, to receive, in person alive, the Medal of Honor that his country had awarded him, believing he was gone. The hero, honored as dead, stood up and took the nation's highest decoration with his own hand. He had been the Marines' greatest ace, and then their most mourned loss, and then, impossibly, their most astonishing survivor. His life after the war was not always easy, and he carried the marks of what he had been through. But the core of the story never dimmed, a man shot down and given up for dead, who endured 20 months of hell in silence and walked back out to collect the honor meant for his memory. The Marines thought they had lost their best. They were wrong, and getting to be wrong about that is one of the rarest and best things that ever happened to them.